Once more, Rome is consumed by fire. For centuries, Rome's only defense against such infernos was disorganized and tragically inadequate. There was no official fire brigade, and each new fire threatened disaster in a city of cramped wooden buildings where open flames were used for light and heat. A single spark could reduce entire neighborhoods to ash, and ordinary citizens lived in dread of the cry ignis, fire. But around the turn of the century, one ambitious man stepped forward with a solution. The young politician Marcus Egnatius Rufus would make history by assembling the city's first publicly funded fire department, a move that earned him fame among the people and, quite unexpectedly, infamy among the powerful. Though Rufus set in motion the creation of Rome's first fire department and police force, his attempt to reform the city would ultimately cost him his life. In this video, we'll cover how ancient Rome faced the constant threat of fire, how Marcus Egnatius Rufus rose from humble origins to create the city's first public fire brigade, and how his ambition and growing popularity brought him into deadly conflict with Emperor Augustus. We'll also show how he paved the way for Augustus' creation of the Vigiles, Rome's first official firefighting and police force, whose legacy lasted for centuries. To understand Rufus's rise and the beginnings of the first fire department, we must first grasp ancient Rome's fiery reality. Fires were frighteningly common. Homes were often built of wood and brick, tightly packed along narrow streets, and lighting, cooking, and heating relied on open flames. Historian A.D. Rainbird estimates that Rome faced an average of 100 fires a day. In the Republic, however, firefighting was largely ad hoc. Responsibility fell to elected magistrates called aediles and a minor night watch, who could only improvise with whatever slaves or laborers were on hand. There was no permanent group of firefighters on the public payroll, which meant the wealthy could run the show when things went up in flames. The most famous example of this is Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome and perhaps one of the richest men to ever have lived. Crassus made his wealth decades before the story of Rufus, as ancient historian Plutarch puts it, out of fire and war, making the public calamities his greatest source of revenue. Crassus had assembled his own team of 500 slaves, skilled in architecture and construction, and would rush to fire scenes not to save the day, but to bargain. As Plutarch recollects, Crassus would buy the burning property on the spot for a fraction of its worth, then have his men extinguish the fire and rebuild. Crassus would eventually meet his end on the Eastern Front. According to ancient sources, the Parthians had him executed by pouring molten gold down his throat, mocking his greed, which had become known far beyond Rome. Rufus was not born into Rome's great aristocratic houses. In fact, he was a novus homo, essentially a new man in Roman politics. Sources hint that his family was of the knightly equestrian class. It gave young Rufus a respectable background, though nothing like the grand lineage of a Julius or a Scipio. To climb the Roman political ladder, he'd need the favor of the crowd. By 20 BC, during the reign of Augustus, the first Roman emperor, Rufus had maneuvered into elected office. In 22 BC, he won the post of aedile, a magistrate responsible for city administration, including maintenance of temples, markets, and crucially, oversight of fire safety. For someone as ambitious as Rufus, it was the perfect opportunity. From the start, Rufus displayed a flair for populist leadership. One contemporary, the historian Velleius Paterculus, mocked Rufus by writing that he resembled a gladiator more than a senator, suggesting he was rough-edged, flamboyant, and perhaps prone to showmanship. In his year as aedile, Rufus set to the unprecedented task of organizing a private fire brigade, one which did not charge or extort the people he saved. He took 600 of his own slaves, outfitted them with buckets, hooks, and axes, and drilled them to respond to fires anywhere in the city. It was frankly a civic revolution in a city used to watching the rich help only when it benefited them directly. The gratitude of the people was immediate and immense. Ancient historians record that Rufus's popularity soared. Cassius Dio notes that in thanks, the people repaid him for his expenses and showered him with honors. Velleius Paterculus, who earlier had mocked Rufus, wrote that Rufus secured the favor of the people in his aedileship by putting out fires with his own gang of slaves, and that his fame increased daily as a result. and Rufus's rewards came swiftly. In 21 BC, immediately after his period as aedile, Rufus was elected praetor, a higher office, despite the traditional custom by which a gap should exist between holding these two offices. Under normal circumstances, Roman law required a few years' interval and a minimum age before advancing to praetor. This might be hard to grasp today, but Rufus's promotion represented a clear deviation from the custom, and his popularity amongst the people had translated into unconventionally fast political advancement. Yet what appeared to the urban populace as deserved recognition of extraordinary service to the community stood out as an alarming display of populist ambition to the governing elite. For Emperor Augustus and the senatorial order, his unprecedented popularity signaled the re-emergence of a type of personal power the new regime sought to contain. After all, Rome had only recently fallen to Augustus, who was still working hard to make his new power look like a restoration and not a takeover. Along comes Rufus, a populist with a private army of 600 and the love of the people. To Augustus, he was starting to look a little too much like competition. Ancient writers suggest that Rufus became overconfident after his successes. Cassius Dio recounts that he grew elated with honor and issued a boastful bulletin at the end of his term, declaring he had handed the city over to his successor, unimpaired and intact. A direct claim that his own actions had kept Rome safe. That kind of credit, implying the city's well-being owed more to Rufus than to the emperor, infuriated Augustus. Augustus ordered the regular aediles to take charge of firefighting at once, undercutting Rufus's independent initiative. Rufus's political ambitions quickly grew stronger. By 19 BC, just 2 years after becoming praetor, he was already campaigning for the consulship, the highest office in Rome. This was highly unusual, again, since candidates were normally expected to move through the traditional sequence of offices only after waiting the required time between positions. Rufus's decision to stand for the consulship so soon after his praetorship reflected both the momentum of his popular support and a growing confidence that his personal prestige might override established political norms. The other politicians were not happy. Gaius Sentius Saturninus, the sole consul in charge in 19 BC, vowed to prevent Rufus's candidacy by any means. Saturninus forbade Rufus to even stand for election, and when Rufus persisted, Saturninus swore that even if the people voted Rufus in, he would refuse to report his election. This was a shocking stance, effectively promising to ignore the will of the voters. Rufus stirred up unrest in the streets, and the plebeians gathered to secure his consulship. One source claims he even ordered a band of gladiators to hunt down and kill Augustus. Ultimately, the Senate had to suppress the people by force. They passed a Senatus Consultum Ultimum, a decree of emergency, Rome's version of declaring martial law. Rufus was soon arrested and charged with conspiracy against Augustus. We can picture him chained in the Mamertine prison, built even 600 years before this story. The popular hero who had saved Rome from fire was now cast as a traitor plotting to overthrow or even assassinate the emperor. Rufus's great popularity could not save him now. Along with some of his followers, he was executed in 19 BC, perhaps given the treatment Rome often offered its traitors, being thrown off the Tarpeian rock. As the contemporary historian Velleius Paterculus puts it, Rufus died the death his life richly deserved, caught red-handed in an overly ambitious bid to claim power over Rome. With Rufus gone, Augustus moved to address the problem his rise had revealed. Rome lacked an organized way to fight fires. Not long after Rufus's death, Augustus established his own firefighting brigade in Rome. At first, he reportedly began with a group of 600 slaves, mirroring Rufus's original number, funded by the state. But this small, state-funded experiment was only the beginning of something far greater. A particularly devastating blaze in 6 AD compelled a grander solution. That year, Augustus officially founded the Vigiles, Rome's first permanent professional fire brigade and police force. A decision that would shape Roman urban life for centuries to come. He gathered approximately 4,000 freedmen and equipped them with pumps, buckets, hooks, swords, and axes. The force was divided into 7 cohorts, each responsible for 2 of the city's 14 regions. Their chief officer was the praefectus vigilum, supported by several tribunes and administrative staff, like assistants, scribes, and clerks. The cohorts were made up of freedmen, freeborn men, and foreigners. Later evidence suggests that the number of Vigiles was doubled in 205 AD, bringing the total to almost 8,000 men. The Vigiles worked mainly at night, when the risk of fire and crime was greatest. Oil lamps, torches, and other open flames were everywhere. The name Vigiles came from the word vigilo, which means to be awake or to keep watch. Each cohort had about 5 trumpeters who signaled alarms and summoned help from nearby patrols or the barracks. They likely also used runners and horses to send messages across the city. Fighting a fire required substantial manpower. About 40 men were needed for a small fire, 75 for one that was spreading, and up to 150 for the largest blazes. The size of the cohorts, up to 1,000 men strong, reflected the intensity of this work. Their main tool for fighting fires was a horse-drawn pump that was submerged in a water tank. Specialists known as equari located nearby water sources, where water was drawn from public fountains and basins under the supervision of the equari. They also used blankets soaked in water or vinegar to smother flames, and as a last resort demolished walls or buildings to stop a fire from spreading. This sometimes led to conflicts, when house owners argued that demolition was not yet necessary. The Vigiles also acted as a sort of predecessor to modern-day police forces, watching for thieves and burglars and monitoring the slaves. They were even occasionally used to maintain order in the streets. In terms of appearance, the Vigiles were very similar to that of regular Roman soldiers. It seems that they wore a tunic and were equipped with a gladius. After 3 years of service, members of the Vigiles earned the right to receive free grain from the state. Shown here is a bronze slab from Rome, dated to 203 AD. It lists the names of Vigiles entitled to receive free grain. Above the inscription appear the busts of Julia Domna, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus, and their son and co-ruler, Caracalla. A third bust of their younger son, Geta, once occupied the center but was later removed following his assassination by Caracalla. Understandably, the Vigiles grew to be quite a powerful force, and one prefect of the Vigiles eventually rose to command the Praetorian Guard, the veteran corps responsible for the emperor's personal security. In the 3rd century, their commanders could be assigned military responsibilities. One such commander, Placidianus, was placed in command of an expeditionary force dispatched to Gaul by Emperor Claudius II upon his accession in 269 AD. The mission aimed to secure the lower Rhone Valley along the border of present-day France and Switzerland against the breakaway Gallic Empire. The Vigiles endured and grew for centuries, but by the late 4th century AD, their responsibilities had been handed over to guilds, bringing an end to more than 300 years of service as the city's watchman. Marcus Egnatius Rufus was a clever, ambitious man who came up with something genuinely new, an organized fire brigade which saved lives and property without the promise of pay. It was an idea that saved lives and earned him enormous public admiration. He became a local hero, someone ordinary Romans could point to as a man who actually helped the city. But in the new political world of Augustus's empire, there wasn't much room for anyone who posed as a rival, and Rufus's popularity and ambition ended up costing him his life. Even so, his idea outlived Augustus himself. Though he paid the ultimate price, Rufus's sacrifice saved countless others by paving the way for the Vigiles, Rome's first official fire brigade. If you found this documentary on ancient history insightful, consider subscribing to stay informed about our upcoming releases. Further reading and sources are available in the description. Feel free to leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future videos. See you next time.